And in the Old Testament prophecy of Micah, the place that he would be born is spelled out. That it would be in this little city of Bethlehem, which is what? David's hometown. This is where David's from, Bethlehem. And that there in Bethlehem one day the Messiah would be born. And the Jews knew that, by the way, because again, Herod, when he's kind of putting the pieces together, calls his advisors together and says, where's the Messiah going to be born? And they say, well, in the town of Bethlehem. So how do you get a pregnant virgin from Nazareth to have her baby way down 60-some miles away in Bethlehem? Well, here's how you do it. You create the Roman Empire. And then while you're creating the Roman Empire, you decide we'll have guys that are emperors of the Roman Empire, and every once in a while, because they thrive on the taxes of their subjects, we'll make sure that the Roman Empire subjugates Judea, and then just when I need it to happen, I'll have the emperor decide that he's going to take a census, which is a means of taxation, and in a census, everybody has to return to their ancestral home. Well, Mary and Joseph both trace their lineage back to David. And so at the command of the Roman emperor, they have to make a journey. And from clear up here in Galilee, they begin this journey with Mary extremely pregnant down to the ancestral city of Bethlehem. And there, in what God calls, by the way, the fullness of time, a phrase meaning that exactly at the perfect moment in human history, Jesus, the Messiah, comes into the world. And there we have one of the great mysteries, I think, of Scripture and of the universe, how somehow, since the Scriptures say that Christ is, and always is the one who holds all things together, it's as if the universe in that instant is being held together by a baby laid in a feeding trough in a stable in a most insignificant little town of an insignificant little nation that is like a speck on the map to one of the great empires in history. And there in that little stable in Bethlehem, God becomes flesh. Incarnation takes place. And that's the first scene then in our story. Really, there's not a lot that we know about Jesus from the time of his birth, really almost for 30 years. We really have two little glimpses of his childhood. One is, we know that when Herod decides to kill all of the children 2 years old and younger, and when that threat of Herod spreads all the way up into Galilee, that the parents of Jesus take him to Egypt for safety until that period is over, and then return back to Nazareth. We know virtually nothing about what happens during that time. There's all kinds of tradition, and this is where the stories come that Jesus would make little clay birds and then throw them up in the air and they'd become real birds. I mean, all wonderful little stories, but nothing that validates any of that. All we know is that they make this journey. What we do know is one little snapshot that takes place when Jesus is 12. So let me see. We could go to black maybe, and we could come up with 12 years later on the screen. And we have this fascinating little event that takes place when Jesus is 12, and his parents come back down to Jerusalem for one of the feasts. I think it was Feast of Passover. And there were 3 Jewish feasts a year that every Jew within a certain radius of Jerusalem was required to come to Jerusalem to celebrate. It was Passover and Pentecost and the Feast of Tabernacles. And on those three occasions, Jerusalem was jammed with people. And in the midst of this jam, they lose Jesus. He's 12 years old. He's pre-adolescent. And they have to go find him. And of course, they find him. He's at the temple. He's 12 years old, and he's engaged in debate with the great scholars of the age. And his parents, they're upset with him. And, and why have you done this to us? And Jesus is kind of like, well, you should have known where I was going to be. Didn't you know I had to be at my Father's house? And so at 12, thanks, Doug, at 12, you have this sense that whether before he has this awareness that somewhere as he's growing, he begins to have an awareness of who he is. And that God is his Father in some unique way. And then all we're told is that he went back home and he lived in subjection to the authority of his parents. And you have this one little verse in Luke 2:52, great little verse, Luke 2:52, that says, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature," so intellectually, physically, in favor with God, spiritually, and men, relationally. And so it's a beautiful, one little statement that basically Jesus is simply going home and he's going to become a well-rounded individual, and then we don't hear another thing for 18 years. And so again, it's not 30 years later. Really, if you take it from a baby, you'd have 30 years later. If you insert the events at the temple when he's 12, 18 years later, and we come to scene 2.